June 4th, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. The Atlantic Ocean is a graveyard of steel and secrets. For 3 years, Hitler's Grey Wolves, his U-boat fleet, have been the undisputed masters of the deep, strangling the Allied supply lines and sending thousands of men to a watery grave. But on this morning, 150 miles off the coast of Africa, something happened that hadn't occurred since the War of 1812, something the US Navy didn't even have a manual for. Lieutenant Commander George Castleman stood on the bridge of the USS Pillsbury, staring at a sight that should have been impossible. A German submarine, U-505, had just breached the surface. But it wasn't sinking, not yet. It was circling, like a wounded predator, its crew jumping into the shark-infested waters in a blind panic. The standard protocol was simple: destroy it, send it to the bottom before it can fire a final desperate torpedo. But Captain Daniel Gallery, watching from the carrier Guadalcanal, had a different, almost suicidal idea. "I want that boat," he whispered. He didn't just want a victory, he wanted the holy grail of naval intelligence. Inside that sinking iron coffin were Enigma machines, secret codebooks, and a weapon the Allies had only heard of in whispers: Hitler's silent acoustic killer. But there was a problem. The Germans were trained to scuttle their boats. They had opened the sea valves. They had set 13 demolition charges throughout the hull. To enter that submarine was to walk into a ticking bomb submerged in the middle of the ocean. If the boarding party failed, they would be dragged 10,000 feet down into the abyss. If they succeeded, they would change the course of World War II forever. This is the story of the day the American Navy captured the uncapturable, and the terrifying secret weapon they found inside that would save thousands of Allied lives if they could get it out alive.
The Hunter and the Prey. The mission began long before the first depth charge was dropped. Captain Daniel Gallery was a maverick. He realized that every time a U-boat was sunk, a treasure trove of information was lost. For 129 years, no American ship had boarded an enemy vessel at sea. The Navy didn't train for it. There were no boarding parties. Gallery changed that. He ordered his task group 22.3 to do the unthinkable: prepare to capture a Nazi sub. The man chosen to lead this suicide squad was Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert David. At 41, David was an old salt, a former enlisted man who knew every pipe, valve, and bolt on a ship. He knew that a U-boat was a maze of death. For 6 weeks, while on routine patrol, David and his 8-man team drilled on the deck of the USS Pillsbury. They practiced jumping from moving whaleboats onto mock decks. They memorized diagrams of German Type 9 submarines until they could see them in their sleep. But their biggest enemy wasn't the German sailors. It was time. German protocol was ironclad. The moment a sub was forced to surface, the scuttle order was given. Sea valves were opened to flood the engine room. Explosive charges were armed. The crew had exactly 4 minutes to get out before the boat vanished. David's team had to do the opposite. They had to get in while everyone else was getting out. June 4th, 11:09 a.m. The sonar operator on the USS Chatelaine suddenly went rigid. "Contact, bearing 045, range 800 yards. A submarine was running submerged, heading straight for the carrier Guadalcanal. The hunt was on. 2 Wildcat fighters dove from the sky, their machine guns marking the sub's position with stitching lines of lead in the water. Then came the depth charges. Boom, boom, boom. The ocean erupted. Oil and air bubbles surged to the surface, and then the Grey Wolf broke. U-505 breached the waves, water cascading off its rusted hull. It was damaged, its rudder jammed, circling uncontrollably at 5 knots. Captain Gallery gave the order that would make history. "Lower the whaleboats! Away all boarding parties!" Albert David and his 8 men dropped into a tiny boat. They were racing toward a 750-ton warship that was still moving, still armed, and, unbeknownst to them, rigged to explode at any second.
Into the iron coffin. The whaleboat slammed against the side of U-505. The hull was slick with oil and seawater. Albert David was the first one up the side. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't wait for the German crew to finish jumping overboard. He reached the conning tower hatch. Below him was a dark, vertical drop into the heart of the enemy. Think about the courage this took. David knew the Germans had demolition charges. He knew the boat was sinking. At any moment, the sub could plunge, sliding backward into the depths, taking anyone inside with it. David dropped through the hatch. The interior was a nightmare. Emergency red lights cast hellish shadows. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine gas from damaged batteries and diesel fuel. Water was spraying from ruptured pipes with the force of a fire hose. "Find the valves! Find the charges!" David yelled over the roar of the flooding. His men fanned out. One sailor found the main sea strainer valve, a massive opening where the ocean was literally pouring into the bilge. The Germans had thrown the cover aside. In the dark, oily water, the American sailor found the cover, wrestled it into place, and tightened the bolts. The flooding slowed, but didn't stop. Then they found them, the secret weapons Hitler relied on to keep his secrets. Scattered throughout the boat were 13 demolition charges. Some were wired to the engines, others were hidden in the torpedo rooms. David and his team had to trace the wires in the dark, cutting detonators with basic wire cutters, never knowing if the next second would be their last. While they worked, a new danger emerged. The USS Pillsbury, trying to stay close to the circling sub, collided with it. The sub's jagged diving planes sliced into the Pillsbury's hull like a can opener. The American ship began to flood. The whaleboat that brought David's team was crushed. They were now trapped on a sinking Nazi submarine with no way off. But David refused to leave. He had found something in the radio room that was worth more than the ship itself. 2 Enigma machines, and next to them, the short signal codebook, the key to every German naval transmission in the Atlantic.
Hitler's silent killer. As the second boarding party, led by Chief Engineer Earl Trissino, arrived to help stabilize the sub, they moved into the forward torpedo room. And there, they found it. Hitler's secret weapon. The Allies had heard rumors of a magic torpedo that could turn corners and find ships even if they tried to dodge. The Germans called it the Zaunkönig, the Wren. To the Americans, it was the T-5 acoustic homing torpedo. Up until this moment, no Allied scientist had ever seen one intact. These torpedoes didn't just fire in a straight line. They listened. They used sensitive microphones to home in on the sound of an escort ship's propellers. If a destroyer tried to speed up to attack a U-boat, the Zaunkönig would hear the increased cavitation and steer right into the engine room. It was a silent, invisible killer that was decimating the Allied fleet. By capturing U-505, David and Trissino hadn't just captured a boat, they had captured the blueprints for Germany's most advanced naval technology. But capturing it was only half the battle. Now they had to get it home. Captain Gallery looked at the prize. He had 58 German prisoners, an Enigma machine, 900 pounds of codebooks, and 2 acoustic torpedoes. But he was 2,500 miles away from the nearest safe port in Bermuda. If a single German plane saw this sub under tow, or if a single radio operator blinked a message back to Berlin, the Germans would know their codes were compromised. They would change the Enigma settings instantly, and the capture would be for nothing.
Gallery ordered absolute radio silence. No messages to Washington, no entries in the ship's logs. The German prisoners were locked below decks and told they would never be heard from again. To the rest of the world, U-505 had simply vanished in the Atlantic. For 15 days, the USS Guadalcanal towed the waterlogged U-boat across the ocean. It was a slow, agonizing journey. Storms threatened to swamp the sub. If it sank now, Albert David's heroism and the secret weapon would be lost to the abyss forever.
The aftermath, saving the future. June 19, 1944, the USS Guadalcanal limped into Bermuda. U-505 was hidden in a remote corner of the base, repainted and renamed USS Nemo. The intelligence haul was staggering. The codebooks and Enigma machines were rushed to Bletchley Park in England. Suddenly, the unbreakable German naval codes became an open book. For the rest of the summer of 1944, the most critical months of the war, the Allies knew exactly where every U-boat was located. They knew their fuel levels, their targets, and their patrol zones. But the acoustic torpedoes were the real game changer. American engineers at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in Washington stripped the Zaunkönig torpedoes down to the last screw. They figured out exactly which frequency the torpedoes listened to. Within weeks, they developed a countermeasure, the Foxer. It was a simple noisemaker towed behind ships that created a sound louder than the ship's propellers. The German torpedoes, following their programming, would chase the Foxer and explode harmlessly hundreds of yards away. Imagine the confusion in the German high command. Their invincible torpedoes were suddenly missing 90% of the time. They suspected the Allies had a countermeasure, but they never suspected U-505. They assumed the Allies had just gotten lucky. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had been a coin toss for years, was effectively over. But what happened to the men? Lieutenant Albert David was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only one given to a sailor in the Atlantic theater. But in a tragic twist of fate, he never got to wear it. He died of a heart attack just weeks before the ceremony. He was only 43. Captain Gallery, the man who dreamed of capturing a sub, faced a different battle. Admiral Ernest King was furious that Gallery had taken such a risk. If the Germans had found out, D-Day could have been a disaster. Gallery got his medal, but he also got a private warning that almost ended his career. The final stand and the legacy. After the war, the Navy did what it always does with old warbirds. They prepared to sink U-505. It was slated to be used as a target for gunnery practice, an ignominious end for a ship that changed history. But Rear Admiral Daniel Gallery couldn't let it happen. He launched a one-man campaign to save the Nemo. He reached out to his hometown of Chicago. He told them, "This isn't just a submarine. It's a memorial to every sailor who never came home." In 1954, one of the most incredible engineering feats of the 20th century took place. U-505 was towed through the Great Lakes and then literally hauled through the streets of Chicago on rollers. Thousands of people watched as a Nazi predator crawled past their front porches. On September 25, 1954, it was dedicated as a permanent memorial. Today, if you go to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, you can walk through those same narrow hallways. You can see the Enigma machines. You can see the sea strainer valve that almost sank the boat. And you can stand in the spot where Albert David risked everything. We live in a world of digital secrets and satellite surveillance, but in 1944, the fate of the world rested on 8 men jumping onto a sinking boat in the middle of a lonely ocean. They found Hitler's secret weapon, and in doing so, they ensured the gray wolves would never haunt the seas again. If you think the courage of men like Albert David and George Castleman deserves to be remembered, do us a favor, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that history matters. Subscribe to join our community of history seekers. And tell us in the comments, have you ever visited U-505 in Chicago? Or do you have a family member who served in the Navy? We read every single one.